And just one day after Michael Landon's death, cancer took the life of actress Lee Remick today, ending a career that spanned almost 4 decades. Remick made her mark with Days of Wine and Roses in 1962, one of more than 20 films in a career that also included scores of TV and stage roles.
The news reports that rolled across television screens spoke calmly of an ending, but they couldn't carry the weight of what had truly disappeared. They announced a death, a date, a name remembered fondly by critics and quietly mourned by those who knew the cost of her beauty. Yet behind those measured voices lay a life shaped by pressure, brilliance, longing, and a silence that followed her everywhere. Lee Remick was gone, but the story they left behind was far darker, far deeper, and far more human than the headlines ever suggested. The mystery begins on May 28, 1991, the day Lee Remick died at just 55 years old. Her body weakened by cancer, her spirit already exhausted from decades spent being watched, shaped, admired, and misunderstood. To the public, it was a dignified farewell to a respected actress. To those who looked closer, it was the quiet end of a woman who had spent her life balancing grace against pain, ambition against vulnerability, and fame against a private self that never truly found rest. Welcome to Starlet Mystery. To understand how Lee Remick arrived at that final moment, one must return to an earlier shock, a moment that revealed the tension beneath her elegance. On September 29, 1962, the release of Days of Wine and Roses stunned audiences across America. The film did not merely show alcoholism. It exposed it with a rawness that unsettled viewers and critics alike. Remick's performance as a woman descending into addiction was so convincing that many wondered how much of her anguish was borrowed and how much was her own. The film earned her an Academy Award nomination and permanently altered how Hollywood saw her. It was not just a role. It was a mirror that cracked something open, both on screen and within her. But long before the acclaim, before the scandals whispered in studio corridors, before the exhaustion etched itself behind her smile, Lee Remick's story began quietly. She was born on December 14, 1935, in Quincy, Massachusetts, into a world that promised discipline more than tenderness. Her father, William Remick, worked in the pharmaceutical industry, while her mother, Gertrude Margaret Waldeck, was a trained actress and teacher. It was her mother who introduced Lee to performance, not as fantasy, but as craft. From an early age, Lee learned that applause was earned through control, precision, and restraint. Emotion was not indulged freely. It was shaped, rehearsed, and presented when appropriate. Her parents' marriage fractured during her childhood, leaving emotional gaps that would quietly define her inner life. According to those close to her, Lee became observant early, learning to read moods, to adjust herself to rooms, to be pleasing without being demanding. This sensitivity would later become her greatest strength as an actress and her greatest vulnerability as a woman. As a child, she studied dance with intensity, training in ballet with dreams of becoming a professional dancer. Her body, however, had other plans. Injuries and physical limitations forced her to abandon that path, a loss that struck deeply. For Lee, movement had been freedom. Acting became the substitute, a way to inhabit other lives when her own felt constrained. In her teenage years, she attended Barnard College, where she studied drama and continued to refine her discipline. Unlike many aspiring actresses, she was not reckless or flamboyant. She was controlled, serious, and inward. Casting directors noticed her composure, her intelligence, and the strange emotional gravity she carried even when silent. She did not sparkle, she simmered. Her first real break came when she was discovered by a talent agent and signed to 20th Century Fox in the mid-1950s, entering an industry that specialized in turning women into carefully constructed illusions. Hollywood in that era demanded obedience, beauty, and emotional availability, often without protection or mercy. Lee complied outwardly, but inwardly she remained cautious, analytical, aware of the cost. Her film debut arrived with a face in the crowd, released on March 25, 1957, directed by Elia Kazan. In the film, she played Marcia Jeffries, a woman caught between ambition and morality, drawn into the orbit of a charismatic but dangerous man. The role was not large, but it was unforgettable. Critics immediately noticed her quiet intensity, the way she conveyed fear, desire, and disillusionment without theatrical excess. She was different from the starlets Hollywood had grown accustomed to. She felt real. Success followed swiftly, but it came with an unspoken warning. Lee was cast not as fantasy, but as truth. She portrayed women who suffered, who questioned, who endured consequences. While this earned her respect, it also placed a psychological burden on her shoulders. She was repeatedly asked to embody pain, restraint, and emotional collapse, often at a time when her own inner world remained carefully guarded. In 1958, she married producer Bill Colleran, seeking stability and partnership in a world that offered little of either. Their relationship appeared solid on the surface, and together they had 2 children. Motherhood grounded her, giving her an identity beyond the camera. Yet balancing family life with an escalating career proved exhausting. Hollywood rarely accommodated women who wished to be both serious artists and present mothers. As her career advanced into the early 1960s, Lee Remick reached a new level of prominence. Films like Anatomy of a Murder, released on July 1, 1959, showcased her capacity to navigate moral ambiguity with elegance and emotional complexity. She was praised for her courage, her intelligence, and her refusal to reduce herself to ornamentation. Audiences trusted her, directors relied on her, yet privately the pressure mounted. According to those close to her, Lee struggled with the expectations placed upon her image. She was expected to be poised but passionate, intelligent but compliant, alluring but respectable. The contradictions were relentless. She rarely spoke publicly about these pressures, choosing instead to internalize them, a habit formed long before fame arrived. Then came Days of Wine and Roses, released on September 29, 1962, the film that would define her legacy and deepen her internal conflict. Playing the wife of an alcoholic who descends into addiction herself, Lee delivered a performance stripped of vanity and comfort. She exposed desperation, denial, and collapse with terrifying clarity. Viewers were shaken. Some believed the role was too close to reality. Rumors persisted that she had drawn from personal struggle, though she never confirmed this. The Academy Award nomination that followed should have been a triumph. Instead, it marked the beginning of a subtle shift. Lee was now associated with emotional darkness, with suffering portrayed too convincingly to dismiss. Hollywood admired her, but it also began to fear her seriousness. She was no longer simply a leading lady. She was a mirror. By the mid-1960s, her marriage to Bill Colleran was under strain, eroded by distance, career demands, and emotional fatigue. They divorced in 1968, a deeply personal rupture that Lee endured with her usual discretion. She remarried later that same year to British producer Kip Gowans, relocating to the United Kingdom and stepping away from Hollywood's constant glare. This move marked the beginning of a quieter chapter, one defined less by stardom and more by reflection, artistic choice, and emotional survival. Yet even as she withdrew from the spotlight, the shadows she had explored on screen followed her, shaping how she was remembered and how she remembered herself. And this was only the beginning. When Lee Remick left Hollywood behind in 1968, the industry barely noticed the silence forming around her. Stars were expected to fade loudly or burn spectacularly. Lee did neither. She simply stepped away, carrying with her a reputation built on integrity, restraint, and emotional courage. Yet distance did not free her from the weight of fame. It only changed the shape of the pressure. Relocating to England after her marriage to Kip Gowans, Lee entered a period of reinvention that felt quieter on the surface, but far more demanding beneath. No longer protected by the machinery of American studios, she chose her roles carefully, gravitating toward complex women shaped by intellect, isolation, and moral conflict. This was not a retreat. It was a narrowing of focus, a deliberate refusal to become a relic of a past era. Her career reached a new creative peak with The Omen, released on June 25, 1976. The film shocked audiences with its cold, unsettling atmosphere, and at its center was Lee Remick as Catherine Thorne, a woman unraveling under the suspicion that her child is something unnatural. Her performance was restrained yet devastating, built on subtle terror rather than spectacle. When Catherine finally confronts the truth, the horror is not supernatural. It is maternal, existential, and unbearable. Some believe the role resonated so deeply because Lee herself was confronting the limits of emotional endurance. By the mid-1970s, she was navigating the exhaustion of long-distance commitments, the quiet strain of maintaining privacy, and the constant expectation that she remain composed under scrutiny. Unlike younger actresses emerging at the time, she had never cultivated scandal as currency. Her suffering was never public. That made it easier to overlook. Awards continued to arrive, though they no longer altered her trajectory. In 1980, she won an Emmy Award for her performance in the television miniseries Ike. The War Years, proving that her power translated effortlessly to the smaller screen. Television offered her something film no longer did: intimacy without spectacle. She could disappear into characters without being consumed by image. Yet behind the calm professionalism, physical decline had already begun its quiet advance. According to those close to her, Lee became increasingly private about her health during the early 1980s. Fatigue lingered. Pain was dismissed as an inconvenience. She had spent a lifetime playing women who endured silently. Now she was living one. Her marriage to Kip Gowans remained stable, but distant, shaped by work schedules and long separations. Love existed, but it was not dramatic. It was practical, reserved, reflective of two adults who understood the cost of emotional excess. Friends described Lee as warm, yet guarded, deeply thoughtful, and often introspective. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, her words carried weight. In 1984, she received another Academy Award nomination for her performance in The Burning Bed, portraying a battered wife driven to an unthinkable act. Once again, Lee embodied a woman pushed beyond endurance by systems designed to ignore her suffering. The role reignited public admiration, but it also reaffirmed the pattern of her career. She was Hollywood's chosen vessel for pain, dignity, and consequence. As the decade progressed, Lee's appearances became less frequent. Each role felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. She was no longer chasing relevance. She was protecting energy. In interviews from the late 1980s, she spoke softly, thoughtfully, often deflecting praise. Fame, she suggested, was something to survive rather than enjoy. Her final public work arrived with the television series Wheels of Fire, released in 1990, filmed while her health was rapidly deteriorating. Few viewers knew that during production, Lee was already battling cancer. She worked through pain, refusing special treatment, determined to finish what she began. According to those present, her professionalism never wavered, even as her body weakened. Her last public appearance occurred in early 1991, marked by visible fragility, but unwavering grace. There were no farewell statements, no dramatic acknowledgments. Lee Remick had never performed for the audience. She would not begin at the end. On May 28, 1991, Lee Remick died at her home in Los Angeles. She was 55 years old. The news reports described her as talented, respected, and dignified. They spoke of awards, performances, and legacy. What they did not say was how much of herself she had given away to inhabit the emotional lives of others. In death, she became what she had always been in life, admired from a distance, understood only in fragments. Lee Remick's legacy is not defined by scandal or excess. It is defined by emotional truth. She reshaped what it meant to portray women on screen, refusing simplification, refusing safety, refusing spectacle. Her characters did not escape their suffering. They endured it. They confronted it. They lived with it. Some mysteries remain unresolved. How much did her roles cost her? How deeply did she absorb the pain she portrayed? Did the discipline that shaped her artistry also prevent her from seeking relief? These questions linger because Lee herself never answered them. And perhaps that is the final mystery. The news reports that announced her death marked the end of a life lived in restraint, intelligence, and quiet courage. But beneath those headlines remains the echo of a woman who carried Hollywood's darkest truths with elegance, and who disappeared not in scandal, but in silence. By the time the world realized Lee Remick was slipping away, she had already learned how to vanish without noise. There were no dramatic press releases, no public appeals for sympathy, no carefully staged final interviews. Her illness unfolded privately, shielded from cameras the same way she had always shielded her inner life. According to those close to her, she understood exactly what was happening, and she met it with the same quiet discipline that had defined her entire existence. Cancer had entered her body years earlier, moving slowly, invisibly, mirroring the way emotional exhaustion had accumulated across her career. Treatments weakened her. Pain became constant. Yet even in decline, she refused to be reduced to fragility. She continued reading scripts, watching films, and remaining intellectually engaged with the art that had shaped her identity since childhood. Acting was never a phase for her. It was the language through which she processed the world. Some believe her final years were marked by a sense of completion rather than regret. She had achieved what she set out to do, not fame for its own sake, but truth. Her performances had changed the way female suffering could be depicted on screen, not as spectacle, but as consequence. Long before Hollywood began speaking openly about addiction, domestic abuse, and psychological collapse, Lee Remick had already embodied them with unflinching honesty. Yet admiration did not shield her from loneliness. As the industry evolved, younger actresses emerged who had not carried the same burdens, who had not been asked to translate society's unspoken anxieties through their own emotional bodies. Lee watched this shift from a distance. She did not resent it. She simply no longer belonged to it. Her last days unfolded quietly in Los Angeles, surrounded by family, away from the public eye. On May 28, 1991, her life ended, not in spectacle, but in stillness. She was 55 years old. The reports confirmed her death with respectful restraint. Obituaries praised her intelligence, her courage, her dignity. But none of them captured the full weight of what she had endured beneath her calm exterior. In the years that followed, Lee Remick's reputation settled into something rare. She was not mythologized as a tragic victim, nor sensationalized as a fallen star. Instead, she became something more difficult to define: a standard, a quiet benchmark for integrity in performance, an actress whose work continued to resonate precisely because it refused exaggeration. Filmmakers and critics still return to her performances, not to admire glamour, but to study restraint. Her eyes conveyed what dialogue never could. Her silences spoke louder than confession. She trusted audiences to feel rather than be told. That trust remains her most enduring contribution. Yet questions linger, unanswered by design. Did Hollywood take more from her than it gave? Did years of portraying emotional collapse require a sacrifice no award could compensate for? According to those close to her, Lee rarely spoke of pain as injustice. She viewed it as material, something to be shaped into meaning. Whether that belief sustained her or diminished her remains an open question. What is certain is that she never betrayed herself for attention. In an industry built on exposure, she chose privacy. In a culture addicted to excess, she chose control. And in a profession that often rewards noise, she chose silence. Today, her films remain quietly unsettling, emotionally precise, resistant to time. New generations discover her not through scandal or myth, but through moments of raw humanity preserved on screen. A trembling hand, a breaking voice, a look that says everything without asking permission. And so the mystery of Lee Remick does not lie in secrets uncovered or scandals revealed. It lies in what she withheld, in the emotional distance she maintained, in the quiet strength that allowed her to carry Hollywood's darkest stories without losing her sense of self, even as it cost her more than anyone ever knew. The news reports that once announced her death fade into archival silence now. But behind those headlines remains a life defined not by how loudly it ended, but by how deeply it was felt. A woman who turned suffering into art, discipline into grace, and silence into legacy. And long after the camera stopped rolling, Lee Remick remains where she always stood, just beyond the spotlight, waiting for those willing to look closer.